25,000 people starved to death today. Tomorrow, another 25,000. If that's God's plan, then God is the problem.
What if I told you the God who made this universe wasn't perfect, but broken? What if everything wrong with this world isn't a test, but a design flaw? Every religion on earth tells the same story. A perfect God made a perfect world, and somehow we screwed it up. But there's an ancient group of believers who flipped that script completely. They looked at all the suffering, disease, chaos, and cruelty baked into reality itself and asked a question nobody wanted to hear. What if God isn't testing us? What if God messed up? Today we're diving into one of the most controversial religious ideas ever conceived, the demiurge. A cosmic architect so flawed, so deeply broken, that he trapped souls in meat prisons and called it creation. This isn't some fringe conspiracy theory. This was a major religious movement that terrified early Christianity so much they tried to erase it from history. And once you understand what the Gnostics discovered about the nature of our reality, you'll never look at suffering the same way again. Let's start with the world as it actually is. Right now, as you're watching this, about 25,000 people will die from starvation, most of them children. Tomorrow, another 25,000. The day after, another 25,000. Every single day. That's not a bug in the system. That's how the system was built. Babies are born with bone cancer. Parasites eat children's eyes from the inside out. Earthquakes flatten entire cities of innocent people. Dementia slowly erases your grandmother's memory until she doesn't recognize your face anymore. This isn't humanity's fault. We didn't design mosquitoes to spread malaria. We didn't program childhood leukemia into our DNA. We didn't place tectonic plates in positions where they'd crush thousands of people without warning. These are features of the universe itself. And for thousands of years, theologians have been doing backflips trying to explain why an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-loving God would create a reality soaked in so much random, senseless suffering. They came up with every excuse imaginable. It's a test. It builds character. We can't understand God's plan. Free will requires evil. Suffering brings us closer to the divine. But here's the thing. None of these explanations actually work. If God is truly all-powerful, he could have created a universe where we have free will without childhood bone cancer. If he's all-knowing, he already knew we'd fail his tests before he made us. If he's all-loving, why does a 2-year-old need to suffer to learn a moral lesson they can't even understand? The problem of evil has haunted every major religion since the beginning, and most believers just accept the contradiction. They hold two opposite ideas in their head at the same time. God is perfect and loving, but also the world is full of horrific suffering. They call it a mystery. They call it faith. But around the 2nd century, a group of mystics looked at that same contradiction and came to a radically different conclusion. What if the God who made this world isn't the real God at all? What if he's an imposter? This is where the Gnosticism enters the picture. The word Gnostic comes from the Greek word gnosis, which means knowledge. Not book knowledge, direct experiential knowledge of spiritual truth. The Gnostics weren't just reading scriptures and following rules. They were having mystical experiences that revealed the true nature of reality, and what they discovered was absolutely terrifying. According to Gnostic cosmology, there is a true God, the real ultimate divine source, pure consciousness, perfect light, infinite love beyond human comprehension. This true God never created our physical universe, because this God is so far beyond material reality that the idea of trapping conscious beings in bodies made of meat and suffering would be absolutely foreign to its nature. So where did our universe come from? This is where it gets wild. The Gnostics taught that there was a divine emanation, a lesser spiritual being called the demiurge. The name literally means craftsman or artisan in Greek. This entity wasn't the ultimate God. He was more like a confused, arrogant middle manager who thought he was the CEO. The most detailed account of the demiurge comes from Gnostic texts like the Apocryphon of John and the Hypostasis of the Archons. These weren't included in the Bible, obviously. The early Christian church made sure of that, but they survived, hidden in jars, buried in the Egyptian desert until 1945, when farmers accidentally discovered them. Here's what these texts reveal. The demiurge is born of Sophia, which means wisdom. Sophia is one of the divine emanations from the true God, but she makes a catastrophic mistake. She tries to create without her divine partner, acting alone, and what comes out is a deformed, ignorant creature, the demiurge. Some texts describe him as having the face of a lion and the body of a serpent. Others describe him as simply blind and foolish, but all agree on one thing: he's deeply, profoundly flawed. And here's the kicker: the demiurge looks around at the void and thinks he's the only God. He has no idea that the true divine realm exists above him. The Apocryphon of John quotes him directly: "I am God and there is no other God beside me." It's pure arrogance born from pure ignorance. He genuinely believes he's the ultimate creator, and in his blind pride, he decides to create a universe. But because he's fundamentally flawed, his creation is fundamentally flawed. He creates the physical universe, including Earth, animals, and human bodies. He sets up systems of suffering, decay, death, not out of malice necessarily, just out of incompetence. He's doing the best he can with his limited understanding and broken nature. He's like a child playing with matches who accidentally burns down the house. Now, if the story ended there, we'd all just be stuck in a random, cruel universe with no hope. But the Gnostics add another layer. The true God looks down at this mess and feels compassion for the souls trapped in the demiurge's creation. So the divine breathes a spark of the true God's own consciousness into humanity. That spark is your true self, your soul, the part of you that feels like there's something more, that looks around at this world and knows deep down that something is wrong. That spark doesn't belong here. This completely reframes everything. You're not a sinner who disappointed God. You're a fragment of the divine trapped in a prison made by a wannabe God who doesn't know what he's doing. Your body gets sick because it was designed by an incompetent architect. You suffer because the world is literally built on suffering. And that feeling you get sometimes, that deep spiritual homesickness, that's your divine spark remembering where it really came from. Let me connect this to something you've probably felt. Have you ever had that moment where you're just existing, going about your day, and suddenly you're hit with this overwhelming feeling that reality is strange? That you're a consciousness piloting a meat robot on a spinning rock in infinite space? That none of this makes sense? The Gnostics would say that's your divine spark briefly remembering the truth. That's Gnosis, trying to break through the illusion. The demiurge isn't just a creator in Gnostic theology. He's a jailer. And he doesn't want you to wake up, because if you realize you're divine, if you access that direct knowledge of the true God, you're no longer under his control. You escape his prison. So he, along with his servants called archons, which basically means rulers or authorities, work constantly to keep humanity asleep, distracted, focused on material things, convinced that this physical reality is all there is. Sound familiar? Look at modern society. We're constantly distracted. Social media, entertainment, consumption, work, stress, bills, drama, anything to keep you from sitting quietly and asking the big questions. Who am I really? Why am I here? What is the nature of reality? The system is designed to keep you running on a hamster wheel until you die, never stopping long enough to realize you're in a cage. The Gnostics saw organized religion as part of this control system. They believed the demiurge revealed himself to humanity as the God of the Old Testament. Think about it. The God of Genesis creates the world, creates humans, and immediately starts laying down rules. Don't eat from that tree. Don't question me. Obey or suffer. When Adam and Eve eat from the tree of knowledge, he throws them out of paradise and curses all humanity forever. He drowns the entire world in a flood. He demands blood sacrifices. He orders genocides. He's jealous, wrathful, petty. This doesn't sound like infinite love and wisdom. This sounds like an insecure tyrant who demands worship and obedience. The Gnostics read the Old Testament and said, yeah, that's not the real God. That's the demiurge. And the snake in the garden? That wasn't the devil. That was a messenger from the true God, trying to help humanity wake up by giving them knowledge. The demiurge wanted humans ignorant and obedient. The serpent offered liberation through Gnosis. This interpretation flips the entire biblical narrative. Suddenly, the God who everyone worships is the villain, and the figures who rebel against him, who seek knowledge, who question authority, are the heroes. It's no wonder the early Christian church declared Gnosticism heresy and spent centuries trying to wipe it out. This wasn't just a different interpretation, this was a complete inversion of their entire power structure. But let's get back to the core argument. Why does the demiurge theory actually make more sense than traditional theology when we're talking about suffering? Because it's the only explanation that doesn't require mental gymnastics. If the universe was created by a flawed, ignorant being who doesn't understand what true goodness is, then of course the universe is full of flaws and suffering. It's not a mystery. It's not a test. It's not for some greater purpose we can't comprehend. It's just bad design. Think about how evolution works. Random mutations and natural selection. Creatures evolving to survive by eating each other alive. Parasites that can only exist by causing pain to hosts. Predators with biological weapons designed to tear flesh. This isn't intelligent design by a loving God. This is a brutal, indifferent process that produces suffering as a core feature. The demiurge didn't create a paradise, he created a meat grinder and called it good. Or look at human psychology. We're wired to suffer. Our brains evolved with a negativity bias because our ancestors who worried about threats survived longer than the optimists who got eaten by lions. We are neurologically designed to be anxious, depressed, fearful, and dissatisfied. Even when things are going well, we adapt and return to baseline unhappiness. That's called the hedonic treadmill. You achieve your goals, get the things you want, and within months you're back to the same level of discontent. That's not a bug. That's how we're built. We're also wired for tribalism, to see outsiders as threats, to form groups and then hate other groups. Wars, genocide, slavery, every atrocity in human history stems from this basic programming. An all-knowing, all-loving God would have designed humans to naturally love all beings. Instead, we got tribal apes with nuclear weapons. And what about mental illness? Depression that makes you want to die even when your life circumstances are fine. Anxiety disorders that make you terrified of everything. Schizophrenia that fractures your sense of reality. PTSD that traps you in past trauma. If these are design features from a perfect God, then God is a sadist. But if they're bugs in a system created by an incompetent cosmic programmer, suddenly they make sense. The Gnostic view doesn't ask you to have faith that suffering serves a hidden purpose. It tells you directly, suffering exists because the builder was flawed. The universe is broken because the creator was broken. And your job isn't to accept it or justify it. Your job is to wake up, remember who you really are, and escape. Now let's talk about what escape actually means. The Gnostics weren't nihilists. They didn't say, well, everything's terrible, so nothing matters. They said the opposite. Because you have a divine spark, because you're connected to the true God, you have the ability to transcend this prison. The path to liberation is gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of your true divine nature. This isn't about reading the right books or following the right rules. It's about inner transformation, meditation, contemplation, mystical practices that quiet the noise of the material world so you can hear the divine spark within you. It's about seeing through the illusion, recognizing that your body is temporary, your ego is a construct, and your true self is eternal and divine. Different Gnostic groups had different practices. Some were ascetics who rejected the material world entirely, refusing to participate in the demiurge's system. Others believed in living normal lives but remaining spiritually awake within them, not being attached to material things, not identifying with your role in society, not mistaking the game for reality. You play the character in the video game while knowing you're not actually the character. There's a text called the Gospel of Thomas, another one that didn't make it into the Bible, where Jesus says, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. That's the heart of Gnostic teaching. Your salvation isn't external. It's not about believing the right doctrine or performing the right rituals. It's about actualizing the divine spark that's already inside you. And when you die, traditional Christianity says you're judged and sent to heaven or hell based on whether you believed and behaved correctly. Gnosticism says something different. If you've achieved gnosis, if you've awakened to your true nature, your divine spark returns to the true God beyond the material realm. You escape the cycle. But if you remain asleep, identified with your ego and body, the archons can trap you again. Reincarnation into another life in the demiurge's prison. Another round on the wheel of suffering. This is why knowledge is so dangerous to the system. The demiurge and his archons need you ignorant. They need you thinking this world is all there is, that you're just a body, that you're powerless, that you should obey authority and never question the nature of reality. The moment you wake up, their power over you breaks. Let's bring this into the present. You don't have to be a Gnostic to see how this theory maps onto our current world. We're living in systems designed to extract from us our labor, our attention, our energy, our money. We're taught from childhood to obey authority. Go to school, get a job, pay your taxes, consume products, don't cause trouble, don't ask too many questions. The people who run the world don't want a population of awakened, spiritually liberated individuals who see through the illusion. They want workers and consumers. And we're kept distracted constantly. Entertainment designed to be addictive, social media algorithms that hijack your dopamine system, news cycles that keep you afraid and angry, consumerism that promises happiness through the next purchase. Everyone's running on fumes, exhausted, anxious, medicated, barely holding it together. And we're told this is normal. This is just how life is. But what if it's not? What if this overwhelming sense that something is deeply wrong with the world isn't depression or negativity? What if it's your divine spark screaming that you're living in a system designed by a flawed architect who doesn't have your best interests at heart? I'm not saying you have to become a Gnostic, but I am saying the questions they asked are more relevant now than ever. Why is there so much suffering? Why does reality feel like a trap? Why do the people in power work so hard to keep us distracted and obedient? Why does organized religion so often function as a control mechanism rather than a path to liberation? And most importantly, who benefits from you never asking these questions? The traditional religious answer to suffering has always been trust and obey. God has a plan. Don't question it, just have faith. But faith is belief without evidence. And when a belief system asks you to ignore evidence and just trust that suffering serves a purpose you can't understand, that's not spirituality, that's control. The demiurge theory doesn't ask you to ignore evidence, it asks you to look directly at the evidence. The universe is full of suffering, the design is flawed, the creator of this system is not perfect, and you are not meant to be here. You're a divine spark trapped in a meat prison on a dying planet in an indifferent cosmos, and your only path to liberation is waking up to who you really are. Does this mean the Gnostics were right about everything? Of course not. Ancient mystical texts written 2,000 years ago aren't going to have all the answers. But they were asking the right questions. They were willing to look at the darkness of reality without flinching and without making excuses for it. They saw suffering not as a mystery to accept, but as evidence of a broken system. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Stop making excuses for why the world is the way it is. Stop doing mental gymnastics to defend the idea of a perfect God creating an imperfect world. Look at reality clearly. Children die of cancer. Parasites eat people alive. Earthquakes crush entire cities. Dementia erases your mind. Your body is designed to decay and fail. This isn't a perfect creation. This is a flawed one. You can accept that and still find meaning. You can acknowledge that the system is broken and still choose to be kind, to reduce suffering where you can, to seek truth and beauty and connection. You can recognize that you're trapped in an imperfect world created by an imperfect creator and still choose to live with purpose. Because that's what the divine spark does. It refuses to accept the prison as the only reality. The Gnostics weren't pessimists. They were realists with a vision of something greater. They looked at the darkness and said, this isn't all there is. Beyond this material nightmare, there's a true divine reality of pure consciousness and infinite love. And the part of you that knows something is wrong, that feels out of place in this world, that's your connection to that truth. So, what do you do with this information? First, stop waiting for suffering to make sense. It doesn't. It's not a test, it's not building character, it's not part of a divine plan. It's the natural result of a flawed system. Second, start questioning authority. Not just political or religious authority, but the authority of the material world itself. Who says you have to accept reality as it appears? Who says you have to identify with your body, your ego, your role in society? Third, seek gnosis, however that looks for you. Meditation, contemplation, psychedelics, mystical experiences, whatever practice allows you to access that direct knowledge of something greater. The divine spark within you knows the truth. Your job is to quiet the noise so you can hear it. And fourth, stop defending the indefensible. When someone tries to explain why children dying of cancer is actually part of God's perfect plan, you don't have to nod along. You can say, "No, that's not okay. That's evidence of a broken system, not evidence of perfection." The demiurge theory isn't just ancient mythology. It's a lens for understanding why reality feels the way it does, why there's so much suffering despite so much potential for good, why systems of power always seem to work against human flourishing, why the world feels like it's run by incompetent tyrants who don't understand what they're doing. Because maybe it is. You don't have to call it the demiurge. You can call it the system, the matrix, the illusion, broken incentive structures, late-stage capitalism, whatever. The name doesn't matter. What matters is recognizing that the world as it exists is not the world as it should be. And you, the conscious, aware part of you that's watching this video right now and feeling something resonate, you're not meant for this place. The real God, the true divine source, didn't create this mess. This is the work of something lesser, and your divine spark is the proof. That feeling that there's something more, that knowing that this isn't right, that refusal to accept suffering as meaningful or necessary, that's the true God calling you home. So the next time someone tells you that everything happens for a reason, that God has a plan, that suffering builds character, remember the Gnostics. Remember that there's another explanation, not one that requires faith in the face of contradictory evidence, but one that looks at the evidence and draws the obvious conclusion. The creator of this world was flawed, and so is the creation. But you, your true essential self, your divine spark, is not part of this system. You're a prisoner of it. And prisoners can escape. The question the Gnostics force you to confront is this: are you going to keep defending your captor, or are you going to start looking for the exit? Are you going to keep making excuses for why an all-powerful, all-loving God would create bone cancer in children? Or are you going to admit that maybe, just maybe, the architect of this reality isn't who you were told he was? This isn't about rejecting spirituality. It's about rejecting bad theology that asks you to ignore reality. It's about reclaiming your divine nature from a system that wants you small, obedient, and asleep. The Gnostics were declared heretics because they were dangerous. Not dangerous to God, but dangerous to the power structures that claim to speak for God. Because a person who knows they're divine doesn't bow to earthly authorities. A person who sees through the illusion can't be controlled. And that's the real threat. Not that you'll stop believing in God, but that you'll stop believing in the false God. The one who demands obedience, the one who threatens punishment, the one who created a system of suffering and called it good. Once you see that God for what he is, a flawed, ignorant, arrogant entity who built a prison and mistook it for paradise, you're free. Not free from the physical world yet. You're still in a body. You're still subject to the laws of physics and biology, but free in the only way that matters. Free in your consciousness, free in your understanding, free to seek the true divine without the mediation of priests or churches or holy books written by the demiurge's servants. The path forward isn't about joining a new religion or following a new set of rules. It's about unlearning the lies you've been told. It's about deprogramming yourself from the belief that suffering is meaningful, that authority should be obeyed without question, that your role is to fit into the system rather than transcend it. It's about remembering what you knew before you were taught to forget, that you're not from here, that this world is not your home, that the divine spark within you is older and truer than any institution or dogma. And yeah, this is a heavy realization. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The comfortable illusions fall away. You can't go back to mindlessly accepting things as they are. You can't pretend the suffering makes sense anymore. You can't bow to false gods or false authorities. You're awake now, and being awake in a sleeping world is lonely and difficult. But it's also the only way to be truly alive, because sleep is death. Unconsciousness is death. Going through life on autopilot, never questioning, never seeking, never accessing the divine spark within you is death. The Gnostics understood this. They'd rather be awake and uncomfortable than asleep and controlled. So here we are. You've made it to the end of this journey into one of the most radical religious ideas ever conceived. The idea that the God of this world is not the true God, that suffering proves incompetence, not perfection, that you are divine, trapped in a flawed creation, and your path to liberation is knowledge. Not faith, not obedience, but direct experiential knowledge of your true nature. What you do with this information is up to you. You can dismiss it as ancient nonsense, you can get angry at the implications, you can feel liberated by finally having an explanation that doesn't require you to make excuses for evil. Or you can do what the Gnostics did. Start seeking, start questioning, start looking inward for the divine spark that knows the truth. The demiurge wants you asleep. The true God wants you awake. Choose wisely. If this shifted your perspective on reality, watch the next video. You're not ready for what's coming.